Hello and welcome back to another lecture. In this lecture, we are going to create our VPC for this project. To create our VPC, we are going to use this reference architecture. We are going to create our VPC with public and private subnets in two different availability zones. We will use all the information in this reference architecture to create our VPC. We are going to use the same CIDR block for the VPC and the subnets. And we're also going to use the name you see here to tag our subnets. We will create a route table. We'll call that route table public route table. And we are going to associate the public subnet 1 and public subnet 2 to that route table. For our private subnets, for now they are going to be associated with the main route table. And we also create an internet gateway and attach the internet gateway to our VPC. We are going to use all the information in this reference architecture to create our VPC. To start, let's open Visual Studio Code. I'm going to minimize this. In Visual Studio Code, open your project folder. I'm going to select File. I'll select Open Folder. My folder is on the desktop. I'll select the Terraform project. And in that folder, I'm going to select my e-commerce website folder. And I'm going to click Select Folder. And that should open your project folder. I'm just going to close this. In the e-commerce website folder, you can see all the files we created in the last lecture. If I select the provider.tf file, and you can see it here. The next thing we are going to do is create a file for our VPC. So in this space here, right click and select New File and name that file vpc.tf. Once you have created your VPC file, the next thing we will do is enter our syntax. Before you can create any resource in AWS using Terraform, I recommend that you know how to create that resource using the management console. And the reason why I recommend that you know how to create that resource in the management console is that, for example, the same step we are going to use to create VPC in the management console is the same step that we are going to use to write our syntax for our Terraform file. To help you understand the steps that we will use to create our VPC, I have created a reference template for you. Please download the reference template in the description and open it to follow along. I'm going to browse to the location where I saved it on my computer, and the reference template is called vpcreference.tf. I'm going to double click it to open it. In this reference template, I have included all the resource type and arguments that we need to create our VPC. Another thing I did is I added notes for you, and the notes will explain the type of resource that each resource block is creating. For example, this resource block is creating a VPC. And the second note that I have up here is the keyword you can use to search for this resource type in Google. So all you have to do is copy this information. I'll copy it, and I'm going to open Google. And in the Google search box, I'm going to paste it in there and press enter. Under your search results, if you select the first one, it is going to take you to the exact location in the Terraform documentation that shows you how to enter the syntax for the resource you are trying to create. For example, I'm trying to create my VPC first, and this is the Terraform syntax to create a VPC. There are also other arguments down here that we can add to the configuration of our VPC. I have added an extra argument down here. So any information you see on my reference template comes from the Terraform documentation. And like I said, to know where that information comes from in the Terraform documentation, all you have to do is copy this second note in my Terraform reference file. If you copy it, come to Google, and I'll open another search box again just to show you. I'll paste it in there, press enter. Under the search results, select the first option and it is going to take you to the exact location in the documentation. So to make things fast, that is why I have created this reference template for you. Plus, in most cases, we are going to add extra arguments that are not in the default documentation syntax. These are the steps to create our VPC. First, we are going to create our VPC. Then we'll create an internet gateway and attach that internet gateway to the VPC. We'll create our public subnet 1. We'll create our public subnet 2. We'll create a route table and add a public route. We will associate public subnet 1 to the route table we created. And we will also associate public subnet 2 to the route table. Then the next thing we are going to do is create our private subnet 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is pretty much all the steps we need to create our VPC. To create our VPC, the first thing we are going to do is create the VPC. So what you can do is you can copy this resource block to create a VPC here. I'll copy it, come back to your VPC template and paste it in there. Once you have pasted, we are going to enter the value for our arguments. The first argument is our CIDR block, and we can enter our CIDR block after this equal sign. According to our reference architecture, the CIDR block for our VPC is 10.0.0.0/16, and we can enter that value in here. But one thing I want to teach you is there are certain values that we are not going to add code into our file. So what I mean by that is we want to add some flexibility here where we can change this CIDR block if we have to create another VPC that uses a different CIDR block. To add that flexibility into our file, what we are going to do is we are going to create a variable file. So to create a variable file, come in this space again, right click in there and select new file. We are going to call this file variable.tf. And once you type it, click out. And there you go. We have created our variable.tf file. You can see it here. I'm going to select it. And in this variable.tf file, you can see I'm in the variable.tf file. This is where we are going to enter all of our variables. The first variable we are going to enter is the variable for our VPC CIDR. To create your variable, you will type it like this. First, you will start by typing variable. And you can use your autocomplete to select the variable here. I'll select this. And it should create something like this for you. The next thing we are going to do is under name, we are going to give our variable a name. I'll call it VPC CIDR. And once you've entered the name for your variable, you can come down here. And the first argument we are going to add is default. So type default. And once you type default, press the space bar and press the equal sign and space again. And we are going to enter the value for our VPC in double quotes. So I'll type double quotes and I'm going to type 10.0.0.0/16. And the next thing we are going to do is we can press enter again. Right under default, we can add another argument and we'll call that argument description. And what I did here is when you start typing it and you see that autocomplete suggestion, press enter and it is going to complete this for you. And all you have to do is enter the value. For the value, we are going to enter VPC CIDR block. And once you've entered it, press enter again. And right under that description, the next argument we are going to enter is type. And you see when I'm typing type, the auto completion is showing here. I'll press enter to accept it. And for type, it is going to be a string. So enter string in here. This is how you create a variable in Terraform. We created a variable, we call it VPC CIDR, and we gave it a default value of 10.0.0.0/16. So now in our VPC template, when we come to this template under CIDR block, we want to reference this variable we just created here. To reference a variable in your Terraform file, I'll come back to that VPC again. And in here, I'm going to enter it like this. You'll start with double quotes, then a $sign. Then you're going to add those two brackets. And in that bracket, you are going to type var dot the name of the variable. We called it VPC CIDR. So you can see VPC CIDR. If I go back to that variable, that is what we called it, VPC CIDR. So that is pretty much how you reference a variable. The next argument we are going to enter is the instance tenancy. And for that, we are going to enter a value of default. So again, double quotes, and in the double quotes, type default. And for any of these arguments, if you don't know what they means, all you have to do is come back to the documentation. And in the documentation for the VPC resource type, if you scroll down, under instance tenancy, you can read about it here. And some of the values it takes is default, dedicated, or host. For our example, we are using the default. So I'm going to minimize this. The next argument we are going to enter is enable DNS host names. And for this, we can enter a value of true. By making the value true, any instance we create in our VPC will have a DNS name. The next thing we need to enter is the tags. We're going to enter a tag name, and we are going to enter a value here. I'll call my value test VPC. And that is all we need to do to create our VPC resource. The next step is to create our internet gateway. Again, I'll come back to my reference template. And this is the syntax to create an internet gateway. I'll copy it. And I'll come back to my VPC template. I'll press enter and I'll paste it here. And for our internet gateway resource, I have created a local name. Just like for the VPC, I created a local name. And all we need to enter is the value of the VPC ID. To reference the VPC ID, which is this VPC up here, we are going to enter it like this. All you have to do is take these two values, copy them. You can copy these two values. And under the argument for the VPC ID, we are going to paste it in here. And all you can do is remove those quotes, add a period between those two, and come to the end of the VPC, add a period, and enter ID. And that is how you reference your VPC ID. To reference the VPC ID, we are going to enter our VPC resource type, period, our VPC local name, and the attribute, which is the ID. The next argument we are going to enter for our internet gateway is the tag. Again, we are going to give it a name, and the value we are going to call it test IGW. So type double quotes and type test IGW, or give it any tag name you want. The next resource we are going to create is our public subnet 1. Again, I'll come back to my reference file and I'll copy this resource block for public subnet 1. Copy it, come back to your VPC file, press enter again, and paste it down there. For the public subnet 1 resource, again, you can see the resource type, and I have given it a local name. We are going to use this argument to create our public subnet 1, and we can enter the values for those arguments here. The first argument is our VPC ID. It is pretty much the same as this up here. So you can copy this and paste it down here. The next argument we are going to enter is our CIDR block for our public subnet 1. Just like we did for the VPC, we are not going to hard code that CIDR block in here. According to our reference architecture, our public subnet 1 will have a CIDR block of 10.0.0.0/24. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a variable for it. So I'll come to my variable file and I'm going to select here, press enter again. And all you can do is copy this variable, copy it, and come down here, paste it here. And all you have to do is modify this. First, we are going to change the variable name and we can call it public subnet 1 CIDR. Once we enter our variable name, we are going to change our default value to 10.0.0.0/24. So this should be 24. And we are going to change our description to public subnet 1 CIDR block. So here, I'll just type public subnet 1. And that is all we need to do to modify this. Remember, change your variable name and change the default value for your CIDR block and change your description. Once you've created your variable, come back to your VPC file and I'm going to scroll down. And for our public subnet 1 CIDR block, we are going to reference that variable we just created. So again, to do that, you'll start with double quotes, $, then the brackets, and type var dot the name of the variable. We called it public subnet 1 CIDR, or you can come back to your variable, copy it here. So that way we don't misspell it. Come back to your VPC and paste it there. And that is all you need to do to reference it. The next argument we are going to enter the value for is our availability zone. And for our availability zone, for now we are going to hard code it in here. And later on in the lecture, we will look at the different ways we can make it dynamic. So for now, let's just hard code it in here. According to my reference architecture, I want to put my public subnet 1 in the first availability zone. And in the region that I'm currently in, since I'm operating in the US East 1 region, my first availability zone in that region will be US East 1A. So in here, I'm going to type US East 1A. And the next argument we are going to enter the value for is map public IP on launch, and we are going to enter a value of true. So what this means is that anytime we launch an EC2 instance into this subnet, that EC2 instance will be assigned a public IPv4 address. The next argument we are going to enter is the tag. For the tag, we are going to enter a name, and for the value, we are going to enter public subnet 1. The next resource we are going to create is our public subnet 2. Again, I'll come back to my VPC reference and I'll scroll down. I'm going to copy the resource block for the public subnet 2. Copy it. Come back to your VPC file. Press enter, and paste it on there. Again, we are going to enter the value, the VPC ID. We can copy this. For our public subnet 2 CIDR block, according to our reference architecture, it is 10.0 0.1.0/24. So what we are going to do is create a variable for it. Come to your variable file. All we have to do is copy this. Press enter again, paste it there. We are going to change our variable name to public subnet 2-sider. And we are going to change the default value to 10.0.1.0/24. And the description will be public subnet 2-sider block. That's all we need to do here. Then come back to your VPC file. For the cider block, all we can do is we can copy this, paste it down here, and just change this to 2. And again, we'll enter it with the quote $var, the name of our variable. If you look, we called our variable public subnet 2-sider. And that is what we have in here. For the availability zone argument, we want to put our public subnet 2 in the second availability zone. According to our reference architecture, you can see the public subnet 2 in the second availability zone. So I'll minimize this. And for that one, we can copy this, paste it here. And the second availability zone will be US East 1B. So for this availability zone, you can select any availability zone you want as your first and second, but just make sure you are consistent as we build the rest of the subnets. So if your first availability zone was US East 1C up here, and your next availability zone was US East 1B, you have to be consistent for where you put the subnet in the first availability zone and in the second availability zone. So I'm going to minimize this. The next thing we are going to enter is map public IP on launch. Because this is a public subnet, it is going to be true. So this means that any EC2 instance with launch in this subnet will be assigned a public IPv4 address. The next argument we are going to enter is our tags. We gave it a name, and the value is going to be public subnet 2. Let's look at our reference architecture. The next resource we are going to create is our route table, and we are going to add a public route to it. So I'm going to minimize this. Come to your reference file and select this resource block to create the route table and add public route. I'll copy it, come back to your VPC template, press enter again, paste it down there. I'm just going to scroll up. The first argument we are going to enter is our VPC ID. So you can copy it up here and paste it there. So I'm copying and pasting it there for consistency. The next argument you are going to enter is your route. And again, this will make more sense if you already know how to create a VPC in the management console. And if you don't know what any of these arguments means, like I said, this second note, if you copy it and open Google, in Google, paste it in the search box, press enter, and under your search results, select the first option. It is going to take you to the exact location of that syntax in the documentation. For the route table, this is the exact syntax we are using, but we excluded the IPv6 routes because we don't need that. We are only routing our traffic on IPv4. So I'm going to minimize this. Under the route, the cider block is going to be anywhere, and this is how you type it. You type double quotes, and anywhere is going to be 0.0.0.0/0. And for the internet gateway ID, remember we created our internet gateway up here. This is our internet gateway. Again, to get the ID of any resource, all you have to do is copy the resource type and the local name you gave it. Copy it. I'll come down here under my internet gateway ID, paste it there. And all we have to do is modify this. I'm going to remove those quotes and add a period between them and come all the way to the end again. Add another period and enter the ID attributes. And that is how you specify the internet gateway ID. It is the resource type name dot the local name of that resource dot the ID attributes. The next argument we are going to enter is the tag. We'll give it a name and we'll give it a value of public route table. Now that we have created our route table, the next resource we are going to create is we are going to associate this public route table to our public subnet 1 and public subnet 2. According to our reference architecture, you can see that our public route table is associated with our public subnet 1 and public subnet 2. Let's go back to our Terraform file and come back to your VPC reference file. In my reference file, I'm going to copy the next resource, copy it, come back to your VPC file, press enter again and paste it in there. For every resource that I've created a reference for you, please remember that it has a resource type and I also gave it a local name. For this local name, I called it public subnet 1 route table association. So for every resource you create, you will have a resource type which is defined by Terraform and the local name which is defined by you. For this resource type, the first argument that we have to enter is our subnet ID. The first subnet we want to associate with this route table is the public subnet 1. So what we are going to do is under public subnet 1, again, copy the resource type and the local name, copy it, and we are going to come down here, paste it here, and remove the quotes between them, add a period, and come all the way to the end, and add a period again, and the attribute we want to reference is the ID. So enter ID. And again, for everything we are entering here, you can find them in the Terraform documentation. For example, the ID is an attribute. If I copy this notes here, I'm going to copy it and open Google. And I'm going to paste it in here. Press enter. Under your search results, select the first option. I'm going to scroll down. You can see under attribute reference, the ID. So that is what we are referencing. We have arguments, and these are the different arguments you can use under the resource block of your resource type you are creating. And you also have attributes in it you can reference. So that is what we are doing here. We have the arguments, and for the value of the subnet ID, it wants the attribute of our public subnet 1, which is the ID. For our route table ID, we are going to do the same thing. Our route table is up here. We are going to copy the resource type and the local name. Come down here, paste it here. Then we are going to remove the quotes between them and add a period. Then come all the way to the end again, add another period and enter ID. So we are referencing the ID of our route table. That is what we need to do to associate public subnet 1 to our route table. The next resource we need to create is to associate our public subnet 2 to the route table. Again, come back to the VPC reference file and you can copy the second one. I'll copy this. Associate public subnet 2 to public route table. Copy it. Come back to your VPC file. Press enter again, and I'm going to paste it here. The first argument we are going to enter is our subnet ID. This time we want to associate public subnet 2 to our route table. So we are going to enter the ID of our public subnet 2. So scroll up to public subnet 2. It is right here. Copy the resource type and the local name. Copy it. Come back down here. Paste it there. Remove the quotation between them and add a period. And come to the end and add another period. Then add ID. That's all you need to do to reference it. For the route table ID argument, we can just copy this up here because it is the same route table. Copy it and paste it down here. And that is all we need to do to associate our public subnet 1 and public subnet 2 to our route table. The next thing we need to do is create our private subnets. According to our reference architecture, we have 4 private subnets, and we want to associate those private subnets with the main route table. I'm going to minimize this and come to the VPC reference file. Copy the resource block for private subnet 1. I'm going to copy it. Come back to your VPC file. Press enter again and paste it there. For the VPC ID, we already know what that looks like, so we are going to come up here. We can copy it here and paste it there. The CIDR block, we are going to create a variable for it. So go back to your variable file. We can copy this variable. Press enter again and paste it down here. And all we have to do is modify it. For the variable name, we are going to call it private subnet 1. So change this to private. And it is going to be subnet 1. For the default value, according to our reference architecture, our private subnet 1 has a CIDR block of 10.0.2.0/24. So in here, we are going to change this to 2. So that is 10.0.2.0/24. And for our description, we can call it private subnet 1. And that is all we need to do to create our variable. Then come back to your VPC file. For the CIDR block, let's reference that variable we just created. To reference your variable, remember you start with a double quote and a $sign and the brackets, and you type var period and the name of that variable. So the variable we called it private subnet 1. So let's copy it, come back here and paste it in there. That is all we need to do to reference our variable. And for our availability zone argument, we are going to put our private subnet 1 in the first availability zone. So if I look at our reference architecture, our private subnet 1 is in the same availability zone as the public subnet 1. So all you have to do is go to your public subnet 1, which is here, copy that availability zone value, and come down here and paste it there. So the reason why I am copy pasting is just to make sure that everything is consistent and I'm not typing things wrong. So in areas where you can copy paste, make sure you are doing that. And for map IP, this is going to be false. And the reason why it is false is because this is a private subnet and we don't want to attach any public IPv4 address to any instance in a private subnet. So that's why this is false. The next argument we are going to enter is our tags. Again, we'll give it a name and a value. We'll call it private subnet 1 app tier. And that is all we need to do to create our resource for our private subnet 1. Let's create the next resource, which is our private subnet 2. Come back to the reference file, and I'm going to copy that resource block for private subnet 2. Come to your VPC file, press enter again, paste it down there. And for our VPC ID, we can copy this. For our private subnet 2 CIDR block, again, we are going to create a variable for it. And according to our reference architecture, our private subnet 2 has a CIDR block of 10.0.3.0/24. So all you have to do is copy this variable, come down and paste it there. And all we have to do is modify it. This is going to be private subnet 2. And the CIDR block is going to be 10.0.3.0/24. And for the description, we are going to call it private subnet 2 CIDR block. That's all we need to do to create our variable. Come back to your VPC file. We are going to reference that variable we create. So to reference it, I can just copy this. I'll copy this and paste it here. And I'm going to change this to 2. So remember, the variable name is private subnet 2. If I go back to that variable, you can see it here, private subnet 2. The next argument we are going to enter is our availability zone. And according to our reference architecture, our private subnet 2 is in the same availability zone as our public subnet 2. So in your file, all we have to do is let's go to public subnet 2. Under the public subnet 2 resource, let's copy that availability zone. And we are going to paste it down here. The next argument we are going to enter is map public IP on launch. Again, it is going to be false because this is a private subnet. The next argument we are going to enter is our tag. We've given it a name and the value is going to be private subnet 2 app tier. To create our private subnet 3, again, I'll come back to the VPC reference file. I'm going to copy that resource block for private subnet 3. Come back to the VPC file, press enter again, paste it in there. The VPC ID, we are going to copy this and paste it here. For the CIDR block argument, we are going to create a variable for it. So let's copy this variable. We are going to press enter again, paste it there. For the variable name, it is going to be private subnet 3 CIDR block. And the default value for our private subnet 3 is going to be 10.0.4.0/24. So here we are going to change that to 4. So it is 10.0.4.0/24. And for our description, we are going to call this private subnet 3 CIDR block. And that is all we need to do to create our variable. Let's come back to our VPC file. Under CIDR block, again, we can just use this to reference it. Copy this, paste it down here, and modify this to 3. For availability zone, let's look at our reference architecture. Our private subnet 3 is in the same availability zone as private subnet 1 and public subnet 1. So all we need to do is, for our public subnet 1 or private subnet 1 resource, we are going to copy that availability zone, copy it, and come down and paste it here. And for the argument map public IP on launch, it is going to be false. And the next argument is our tags. We have given it a name, and we are going to give it a value of private subnet 3 database tier. The last resource we are going to create is our private subnet 4. Come to the VPC reference file, copy your private subnet 4 resource, come back to your VPC file, press enter again, and paste it down there. For our VPC ID, we are going to copy this and paste it there. For the CIDR block, we are going to create a variable for it. So select your variable file and copy this variable. Press enter again, paste it there. Then I'm going to modify the variable name to private subnet 4 CIDR. For the default value for our private subnet 4 CIDR, according to our reference architecture, it is 10.0.5.0/24. We are going to change this value to 10.0.5.0/24. And for the description, it is going to be private subnet 4. So we have private subnet 4 CIDR block. That's all we need to do for our variable. Come back to your VPC file. For your CIDR block argument, copy this and paste it here. Remember to change it to private subnet 4 CIDR because that is the name we gave the variable. The next argument we are going to enter is our availability zone. And again, according to our reference architecture, our private subnet 4 is in the same availability zone as our private subnet 2 and public subnet 2. So you can go to your private subnet 2, which is right here. Copy that availability zone. And we are going to paste it here. For the map public IP on launch, it is going to be false. And the next argument we are going to enter is our tags. We have given it a name, and the value is going to be private subnet 4 database tier. This is all the resource we need to create our VPC in this reference architecture. So once you've created all your resource, all you have to do is come to File and select Save All. Another thing I want to mention is make sure that your VPC reference file that I gave you is not listed here. This is just a reference file for us to follow along. The files you should have in here should be, for now, the provider.tf, variable.tf, and vpc.tf, and also the folder and the files for your plugin. So this VPC-reference file should not be in this folder. We are done with this VPC reference file now, so we can just close it. Our file is ready and we can create this VPC in our AWS account. The next thing I want you to do is open your AWS account. I've logged in my management console. Select Services and come down to Networking and Content Delivery and select VPC. You can see under my VPC dashboard that I currently have one VPC, and if I look in it, it is my default VPC. Now let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. The next thing we are going to do is open the terminal. So select Terminal and open a new terminal. In the terminal, the next command we are going to run is called Terraform plan. So type Terraform plan here and press enter. And there you go. Once you type Terraform plan and press enter, the Terraform plan will show you the list of things that Terraform will create in your account. So down here you can see the plan, and it is telling you that it is going to add 11 new resources. It is not going to change any resource because the number is 0, and it is not going to remove any resource because that number is 0. And if you want to know the resource that Terraform will add, you can scroll up here. You see all this resource with green, the AWS VPC, it is going to create a VPC. If you scroll up, it is going to create our subnet, and this is the public subnet 2. It is going to create the public subnet 1, and so on. So you can review this plan before you actually create it in your environment. This plan is useful for you to know what is going to happen before you actually implement it. So I'm going to go back down. The next Terraform command we are going to run is called Terraform apply. So type Terraform apply here. And once you type Terraform apply and you press enter, it is going to create our VPC in our account. So I'm going to press enter. And again, it is showing me the plan and letting me know that it is going to create 11 resources in my account. And it is asking me, do I want to perform these actions? And I'm going to type yes in here. Type yes and press enter. And Terraform will start creating the resource in my AWS environment. So you can see now it is creating my VPC. And there you go. It is creating all the resources in my AWS account. Again, if I go back to the management console, and in the management console, if I refresh, and you can see that I have 2 VPC. The second VPC was created by Terraform because in our Terraform file, we gave it a tag of test VPC. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code and wait for Terraform to finish creating all the resources in my account. Then we are going to come here and review all those resources. And there you go. Terraform has finished creating all the resources we listed in this file in my AWS account. And you can see it created 11 resources and it didn't change anything or destroy anything. By destroy, they mean it didn't remove anything. So let's go to our AWS account again to review our VPC to make sure we set up everything correctly. I'm going to go back to my AWS account. In our management console, you can see we have 2 VPCs. The test VPC is the VPC that was created by Terraform. The next thing we can review is if you select the VPC, you can see that our DNS hostname is enabled because that is what we specify in our Terraform file. And you can also see that our CIDR block is 10.0.0.0/16. The next thing we can review is our subnets. I'm going to select subnets and I'm going to filter this by my test VPC. So select in here and select your VPC. Now I can only see the subnet in that VPC. I'm going to expand this. You can see that I have private subnet 1, private subnet 2, private subnet 3, private subnet 4, public subnet 1, and public subnet 2. Let's review public subnet 1. I'll select that. You can see my public subnet 1 is in the US East 1A. And let me review the public subnet 2. Public subnet 2 is in the US East 1B. So make sure you review all your subnets to make sure they are in the right availability zone. The next thing we can review is our route table. I'm going to select route tables. And again, I'm going to filter this by my test VPC. And you should only have 2 route tables in here. The first route table is your main route table. And this route table was created when the VPC is created. The second route table, which we tagged public route table, is the route table we created in Terraform. And this route table, we associated 2 subnets to it. So if I select that route table, first let's review the routes. I'm going to move this up, and you can see we have a destination of 0.0.0.0/0 through our internet gateway. And let's check our subnet associations. Select the subnet associations. You can see that our public subnet 1 and public subnet 2 are the only 2 subnets associated with this route table. And according to our reference architecture, we want our private subnets to be associated with the main route table. So if we select this first route table, which is the main route table, and we come to subnet associations, and I'm going to scroll down, you can see that 4 subnets are associated with this main route table. And what a main route table does is, anytime you have subnets in your account that are not explicitly associated with any route table, those subnets will be associated with the main route table. So everything looks good. What about our internet gateway? And again, let's filter it by our test VPC. And you can see our internet gateway that we call test IGW is assigned to our test VPC. So we've configured everything correctly in Terraform, and we can verify those configurations in our management console. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And now we want to remove all those resources from our account. To remove all the resources Terraform just created in our AWS account, in the terminal, we are going to type Terraform destroy. Once you type Terraform destroy, press enter. Again, it is going to give you a plan, and it is going to let you know what it is going to do. You can see it is going to destroy our VPC, meaning that it is going to remove it. It is going to remove the public subnet 2. It is going to remove the public subnet 1, and so on. So once you've reviewed the plan, you can come back here, and it is letting you know the plan here. It is not going to add any resource or change any resource, but Terraform is going to remove 11 resource. And it is asking you, do you want to proceed? You are going to type yes and press enter. And Terraform will remove all the resources from our AWS account. Let's give it some time. And there you go. Terraform has successfully removed the 11 resources it created in our AWS account. This is how to create the VPC for this project using Terraform. In the next lecture, we are going to be creating our Terraform file for the NAT gateway. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.